Okay, so here we have the Retina 2 type 011. This is the one that's come from Canadian Kodak, and they've put their water slide transfer on the pressure plate. The companion to the other Retina 1 that I had is a parts and repair camera. So this one, what is its faults? Well, you can see that the leather is gone here. I can tell from this seam here that it's actually not even in the right position, so the remains of the leather here have been off the camera and have been glued back on again, not correctly, and of course there's a piece missing. So I'll have to replace that piece somehow. It's missing the button. The release button for the front is missing. That shouldn't be a problem. I've got one in my parts, I know. The leather is obviously loose. I can put my tweezers through underneath there, no problem at all. All that leather has obviously been most likely stripped off. It may have fallen off by itself. I can see the leather on the back is not stuck particularly well. I may choose to strip that off completely and re-glue it. Give me a chance to deal with those very minor Zeiss bumps at the same time. What else can I tell about this? Well, the shutter does work after a fashion. The focus scale here, you can see that that's not sitting square against the body. That means that it's pulled off over the top of the screws that hold it to the focus helical. So that's not sitting square. That certainly needs attention. There's something odd going on with the advance knob here, the film advance knob at the top. It's very, very wobbly. It's sitting at an odd angle. So there's something very strange going on there too. So I might start at the top of the camera, and I'll start by stripping off the rewind knob. And the rewind knob is removed simply by putting something through the forks of the rewind shaft and unscrewing it by hand. Yes, the advanced knob's going to come off for us, that's a bonus. It doesn't look like anyone's had the top off that. I'll have to find the right spanner. Oops, there's a stray washer sitting there on my bench top. I must have dropped that from the previous job. I had my washers out loose. Right. Can I remove the top cover? I've cocked the shutter. Nope. Better get the screws out of the end first, I suppose. Right, 1, 2. You can often get the top cover off by cocking your shutter and rolling the film advance until it locks, telling me that the release is locked here. Hold down my shutter release with the tip of a screwdriver, and I can just pull that top cover back off the shutter release and back off the rewind lever at the back. That gets me into the top of the camera. So, frame counter can come off. This is all very dirty in here. I'm interested in why this is so loose. This is our film advance. And looking at this, I can see that the screws that hold it down are loose. There's no special reason to believe there'll be a serious problem there to fix. I think that should be fairly straightforward. I'll start removing things. The rangefinder first, I think. And I think we can have the rewind assembly off complete. Right, this is the setting wheel for the frame counter. We'll unhook that spring, get that out of the way. This is held on by that screw at the pivot for the arm for that setting wheel. Lift that off, lift that shield off, and see what we've got here. So our film shutter release can be lifted out. Off with the gear. Unhook that spring. Lift these components off. There are two washers in that section, and you don't want to lose them. I need to note where they came from. I'll need to take this piece off the top here, and to do that I need to use my spanner again on the flats on the above the film take-up spool. That shaft's got two flats on it, and this piece is left-hand threaded. No, I'm not, haven't got my spanner on there properly. I've got the state of the lens in here. I'm going to have to find out what's going on there. It looks like it's got a cataract. That's better. Now I've got my spanner in place. That's good, that's coming loose. The Retina 1 that I was dealing with recently, that was extremely tight getting that piece off. And here we have our fault with the film advance. Those three screws are just loose. I'll just tighten them down for a second and see how it behaves then. No, that's completely normal. So those three screws were loose. That was the fault with the film advance. This camera, of course, has probably been out of action for many years. It's been in someone's collection, probably gathered up from a garage sale somewhere as a dead camera and put aside. I'll remove these screws and these springs, lift out the take-up spool, and we're just about done for the body. I'll remove the two screws from here and lift out this shaft, I think. Some of these screws you will find that they are smaller screws, they're pointed and they fit into recesses in the shaft, so they're only located in a single position. In this case They were quite large screws by comparison. They were a flat end on them. They do not lock into any particular position. It's not a good design, but obviously it functioned well enough for the time. So there we have our Film Advanced component stripped from the body. And I'll strip the surround from the tripod socket. And we already know this was made for the export market because it's got the imported by Canadian Kodak sticker on the pressure plate. But if we hadn't known that, we would have been able to tell because of the made in Germany embossed in the or engraved in that piece there. Right, this is all loose. I can't tell from the state of this whether that's spontaneously let go. The adhesive doesn't look very promising, or whether somebody had peeled it off. I would suspect that that just spontaneously let go. Our tripod socket. These are often loose. This one is tight. There's nothing in there that I need to get to, so that can stay where it is. We'll take the front door off. A single hinge pin screw, bottom and top. And quite commonly there will be a washer in at the top or bottom position there to take up any rattle in the door. I've just lost that screw down the hole in the body. Never mind, we'll get it back. Just checking to see if there is a well, there's our screw. I don't see a washer and I don't see a mark where a washer was, so there wasn't in this case. And I'll lift that door off. This guide slots at the front. Now I want to remove the shutter and lens assembly from the body. Which may or may not go smoothly. And in this case, it went smoothly. There's our retaining ring. Look at the state of that lens. That's awful. Right, so what have we got here? Well, at the front, we've got our coupling ring here that couples through on this arm to the rangefinder. So we can have that off. If you're doing this job, I suggest that you lay the parts out carefully, use a digital camera to take lots of photos of the procedure, and take great note of where the screws go back. Here, one of these screws has popped through on the focus scale. Our focus scale ring is held by 4 screws down to the outer focus helical. One of the screws has popped through, and hence the focus scale ring is not sitting square to the body, and that will be making the focus even tighter than it otherwise would have been. I'm going to scribe a mark across that so I know where it came from. And I'll remove the 3 screws that are holding it in place still. The focus scale ring may even be slightly distorted now because of this. but that's a problem I can probably deal with. We'll remove this fourth screw that had popped through. 4 screws hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, and they can come off. The bellows have just dropped back into the body. 4 screws hold our focus mount complete to the back of the front standard. And they're tight, which is good. Sometimes they're loose, in which case the whole lens and shutter assembly rattles about a bit. Alright, we'll knock those 4 screws out that were holding the bellows to the front standard, put them to one side. Checking here my focus mount. There is an alignment mark over here. The alignment mark is not square. I'm going to put my own alignment mark there so that it's easy to see. We've got 6 screws holds this together. One more to go. That one was loose. That's unusual. Pull out our focus helical. The inner and outer helical move relatively smoothly on each other. I can see that they're quite dry. They're not sticky enough for me to say that that was the cause of this focus ring having pulled over the screw head. It's just as likely that the camera had been dropped and the knob hit something and popped that off. And you can see there's a little mark in here, a notch in the ring at this point where that screw head's pulled through. So there we have it. Those parts are all in pieces now. I need to get the bellows struts out of this body. 4 screws will do that. One at the base here. I'm just going to put a spot of solvent on there. That'll help loosen that up. One at the top here. That one's also a spring post, so it's got a raised head. 2 in the film cassette chamber. They don't want to move, so they need a bit of encouragement. Let's try this one on the base of the camera. We'll be careful not to bend this guide post at the top for the shutter release. Let's see if this one will come loose. No, that screw head is not very happy. I need a hammer. Back shortly. Hold on to your seat. These ones, I just need to drop this between my knees. Do the same to this. Couple of taps. And it's just like using an impact driver to get the screws loose on your motorbike. Except it doesn't require quite so much thumping. Bellows struts will now lift off. There's the return spring for them. There should be 2 washers in there, spacer washers. There they are. That's the screw that fell down in the body earlier. So here we have the body stripped out, ready to be cleaned. The leather, I'll check that closely. I might not remove that leather entirely. It does seem to be reasonably well stuck. We'll see. It's coming up around the edges here. It means that it was whatever choice they'd made for the adhesive when they were manufacturing the camera, and they did change their adhesive over the years, possibly just because with shortages post-war they couldn't get what they really wanted and they had to use something else. So that certainly needs, I think I'll strip all that leather, re-glue that. This body's got to be cleaned out, get rid of all the dust, grit, old grease, anything of that nature. The componentry, all the component parts of course will need to be cleaned very carefully. The bellows struts I will look at. I'll be checking these arms to make sure that the arms aren't bent, or that they aren't bent in a way I don't like. The struts on these are not exactly flat. The inner ones should be flat, they should be straight in this plane. The outer ones should dish out slightly. They should be higher at their ends than they are in the centre in this orientation. And that's so that when this is pinched into the body, these pins tend to pop up into the positions here, the lock positions at each end. So it pre-tensions them. This is a little bit dirty, perhaps a little bit of surface corrosion, certainly nothing serious. They should clean up well. And I'll also check to see that they're parallel. The front surface here should be parallel with the back. And if the arms are bent, then that won't be the case. But they do appear to be pretty good, so I'm not expecting any problems. So these components all have to be cleaned up and reassembled. I'm just going to have a look at this lens. This is the rear lens component from the shutter. It is exceptionally cloudy and looks pretty awful on the outside. The inside doesn't look so bad. I'm going to have a quick clean of that, because I might just as well discover now whether this camera can be reassembled in its current state, or whether I've got to find a new lens set for it, or indeed whether it's just going to join the parts bins. As I clean that with some glass cleaner, I would say that it's something oily. It's like an oily haze on there. It's cleaning off pretty well. I strongly suspect it'll clean off even better with something that's a bit better solvent for oils and greases. So I'm just going to use a bit of naphtha on here and clean that again to lift off any greasy residue. And then I'll go back in with my glass cleaner. I don't know whether you can see any of that, I'm probably off screen. I'll go back in with the glass cleaner and I'll clean that surface again. That's looking pretty good. I'm seeing a bit of a rainbow hue to it, which may be the coating, or it may be an oily film still. If somebody had been silly enough to squirt some oil in here, then it possibly oil has got into the lens component. I'm going to clean the other surface of that lens. I need to make sure that it's just a little bit of surface contamination which will clean off, and that I'm not looking at something internal which would require removing the lens, dismantling this. Some of these components will come apart. It's probably screwed together at this point. It doesn't have a lock screw to hold those components together, so that suggests to me that it has probably been locked at that point with a bit of lacquer or something of that nature. Getting these components apart to clean it internally could be quite a trial. Interestingly, this lens is serial numbered at the back. It's unusual for the rear component to be serial numbered. It either says 6008 or 8009. We'll see what the front serial number is. 8009. So it is the matching lens for this front component. To tell the truth, I hadn't noticed that before on these ones. I know they did that on the 3Cs and similar cameras, but in those cases people could take the front component off, and there was always a danger that if they owned 2 or more cameras they may mix them up. It has a bit of a rainbow sheen to the surface of that glass. I think most likely that is nothing serious. The front component, the front component's coming apart. As I turn this, I'm just turning the front part of that lens mount. I'll unscrew that. That will retain the front part of the lens. This piece needs to be unscrewed, and I'm going to have to find a friction tool to do that. Back very shortly. Here we have the weapon of choice. And you saw there all I did was press down on that very hard and rotate it, and that unscrewed that lens component from the camera. I will screw that back together, so I don't want to get those components more dirty than I need to. Let's have a look at our, got a couple of shims from the back of the shutter here. We have one more shim here at least. They're very, very oily. You have the shutter off the camera here now complete. I'm checking the state of this. Now, as I move the aperture setting lever, I can see that those diaphragm blades are flexing. That tells me that they're very oily and they're sticking together. They don't really want to move. The shutter, set to a second. What have we got? It does run down. It sounds a little bit slow. The shutter blades are obviously oily, and if I hold my release lever and let this off slowly so that the blades can only open slowly, you may see the oily pattern on those blades there where they overlap. There you are, and I've just brought that back. Those blades should be closed at that point, but they're not. That's because they're gummy. with oil. So the shutter certainly needs service. The lens looks like it is good enough to work with. The body now is all in 1,000 pieces all over the bench, and I will have to clean everything up and put everything back together.